Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first official video of my Horus Heresy series. This first video is going to start to dive into the actual books that make up Horus Heresy, instead of the extrapolations and the rumors and notes of information that we've gotten from other sources. It'll be my first dive into the actual books itself, and trying to break down not only what happens and all the characters, but also how it's presented, as there are some pretty incredible writers in the series. So I like to talk about how they decided to show things and present people, because the decisions they made are very important. Firstly, there's a small correction to my previous video. I had stated that during the Long Night, also known as the Age of Strife, ships from Mars returned to Terra but found nothing of value, so they ignored it. But that's not entirely true. As stated in the short story, The Caban Project, they simply decided that the people themselves were of no value. Terra, though, was a trove of technology and data. Vaults of Golden Age technology, data from research and testing well beyond the cult mechanicis's capabilities. All of this was held by people that didn't understand it. Techno-barbarians wielded a Drathic weaponry, disintegration beams that are deemed too dangerous for mortal use during the Great Crusade. It was just everywhere. So Mars actually came into conflict with Terra, enacting small-time raids to recover these invaluable pieces of technology. Raids that were finally halted by the Treaty of Olympus Mons between the Emperor and the Cult Mechanicus. Again, a small correction, but I wouldn't be the unofficial omnibus if I didn't cover every scrap of info possible during such an undocumented period. In the year 798 M30, the Emperor began the Great Crusade. This began just after he had brought the Sol system under Imperial compliance. He bent the gene labs of the lunar Selenar to the production of his Astartes legions in 703 M30, signed the Treaty of Olympus Mons with Mars in 739 M30, vassalizing the Mechanicum of Mars under Imperial rule. He wiped out the Xenos Empire that had taken control of Jupiter, returned Mercury back to its full mining production, and unified a shattered solar system under one singular ruler. However, he didn't stride out from the Sol system in one singular push, his 20 legions fully formed, armed, and ready to reconquer the galaxy. There is a singular fact that has always been true since the Age of Strife, and even into the modern lore of 40k. The Imperium of Man will always have enough manpower, it will always have enough weapons, enough foodstuffs, enough resources, enough planets to populate, but the one thing it desperately needs but can't get is time. With enough time, the Imperial war machine could eradicate every threat within the Milky Way galaxy. With enough time, every Necron Tomb World, Tyranid Hive Fleet, Orc Wog, and Dark Eldar Coven could be found and destroyed. The problem, however, is that there isn't enough time. The modern Imperium fights a war on a million fronts. As soon as one enemy is defeated, another pops up to threaten it once again. There isn't enough time to fully eradicate a threat, so it just rises again later down the line. This is the fact that the Emperor was well aware of. So he started his Great Crusade in 798 M30, with everything he could muster. It's stated in Horus Rising that 3 Astartes legions took part in the war against Luna, and all of them are badly scarred because of it. By the time the rest of the Sol system was brought to heel, it's likely that about half of his legions were fully formed and released. The short story, First Legion, takes place during the Rangdan Crusade, close to 896 M30, almost a full century after the beginning of the Crusade. In this story, Lionel Johnson remarks that the Ghost Legion, the 20th Legion, had just been deployed from Terra, joining in the Crusade. The Crusade was not a singular outward push into the galaxy, but a constant stream of expedition fleets that were sent out into the galaxy on a yearly basis. 3 years after the Crusades began, in 801 M30, the first of the lost Primarchs was found, Horus Lupercal. Lupus Daemonis tells the story of his discovery and his life on Chthoniya. Chthoniya used to be a massively industrialized world, with the entirety of its surface covered in manufactorums and industrial processors. All of this pollution made the surface entirely uninhabitable, so everyone moved underground. Over thousands of years, this turned the Chthonians into tunnel rats that lived, breathed, and died in the confines of tunnels. Being the first found, Horus was brought to the Emperor immediately, and the Emperor's work began in earnest. After a few years of tutelage and training, Horus was given command of the 63rd Expedition Fleet. So again, around after 5 or 6 years of the Crusade occurring, the 63rd Fleet was formed. It was constantly growing. Horus was given command of this fleet, but his expeditionary fleet fought alongside the Emperor himself. The Emperor commanded the first expeditionary fleet, and together they swept through the galactic south. Horus and the Emperor became incredibly close, as Horus learned everything he knew from the Emperor himself. How to wage a war, how to duel, how to handle politics, how to make unimportant people feel important, how to lie to achieve your own goals. In many ways, Horus was set to become just what his father was, because, as Horus himself states, every Primarch was created with a piece of their father within them, and Horus contained the Emperor's ambition. Even while a child on Chthoniya, even as he had never seen the sky or the stars before, he dreamed of a better world and a better life. The constant thought that there must be something better than this, constantly swirling through his mind. So, as he brought the light of the Imperial truth across the galaxy, he was finally able to achieve his own dreams. It's easy to focus on what Horus became in his later days, and forget about who he was before that. The very title of this discussion is called the Horus Heresy, and as such, people often forget just what an amazing person he once was. He truly was a shining example of what the Primarchs were meant to be, and his downfall is so much worse because of it. He's shown to be humble, he laughs and jokes with his sons, he's merciful to those that seek repentance. In False God, Horus is on the warpath to kill Yugen Temba, a commander he left behind on the planet world of Davin to oversee it. Temba, however, turned traitor and denounced the War Master. So, in a rage, Horus goes after him, finally confronting him in single combat. The War Master kills Temba, but realizes that Temba wasn't in control, and that something had twisted him and controlled him. In Temba's final moments, Horus weeps for his lost friend. He weeps. Horus was a true example of the Emperor's dream, and a man that the galaxy should have had. It's only because of deceit, scheming, and chaos itself that Horus is only remembered as a heretic. We should take a moment here and answer the question, just what is an expeditionary fleet? That's a hard question to answer. There is no codified, perfectly organized example for what these fleets are, but broadly, they are fleets of enough individual strength and power to conquer a solar system. A core of a fleet is composed of Astartes, usually with 3 to 5 companies worth, or 300 to 500 Astartes, though this can vary wildly. The short story Call of the Lion tells us that that expeditionary fleet contained 3 companies, and it was a fleet made for less combat than most. One must keep in mind that the Milky Way galaxy in the 30K was an entirely different galaxy to 40K. The Necrons hadn't woken yet, the Tyranids didn't exist, the Tau were cavemen, the Eldar were in shambles, chaos was basically non-existent. There was literally nothing that truly threatened Astartes. Entire worlds could be conquered by force, with only a few losses in the Astartes numbers. The novel Fulgrim describes his campaign against the Lair, and in it he lost 300 Astartes, but is rumored to be around 600. 600 Astartes. This number was repressed and made to seem just like a rumor by all of the people on board, because that's basically unheard of at this time. There was a prevalent idea that Astartes were immortal, because so few things could actually kill them. So 300 Astartes could crush almost anything that they come across. The Lair were described as a force that would be so impossible to overcome that the Imperium actually considered just making them a protectorate, making them some small little vassal state that's controlled but not destroyed. They thought that the cost was too much to pay because it would have taken the lives of hundreds of Astartes. That's how powerful they were. People thought of them as basically a continent-level power that could control a massive part of a planet on a squad basis. And even if 300 Astartes couldn't crush everything in a solar system, you could always just ask for reinforcements from another expeditionary fleet, another fleet that's probably just a couple weeks away. Along with the Astartes, the fleet also utilized the Imperial Army and the Imperial Navy. The Imperial Army is different from 40K's Imperial Guard. The Army was a mixed regiment organization where each detachment of the Army utilized infantry, artillery, armored vehicles, and specialized formations such as snipers, scouts, frogmen, etc. The difference is that the Guard is split into individual regiments and units. There's an infantry regiment, there's an armored regiment, there's an artillery regiment. The Army didn't do this. It was all mixed together, so each individual force was much more powerful than a single regiment of Imperial Guard. So the Astartes, and in a few cases, the Mechanicus' Titanicus units, were the spear tip that pierced into the heart of an enemy, and the Imperial army is the shaft that drives the kill forward, finishing it off. This is the core of how war was waged during the Crusade. Even during the Crusade, Titan Legios were incredibly rare, and likely saved only for fleets that had significant quantities of Astartes or, Primarchs. As these are the only groups we get to read about during the period, it's a fair assumption. But an expeditionary fleet isn't just military might. It's also composed of Mechanicum mass loaders, carrying tech adepts brought to create prefab buildings, maintain the heavier equipment of the Army and Navy, and science labs to investigate, codify, and understand the worlds that are being conquered. Researching Xenos artifacts, technology, and weaponry is a consuming pastime, and they are happy to do it. Fleets also contain secondary formations of engineering corps that follow to repair or rebuild worlds that are being conquered. If a human planet fights against the expedition, then destruction would be significant, so it's their job to repair what is damaged and build what the planet lacked. For many Pharaoh worlds, these engineering corps could construct hospitals, schools, plumbing, things that they never imagined before. There wouldn't be a galaxy left over if these engineers didn't exist. It would be a galaxy of smoking rubble. And finally, the fleets also contained some rogue traders, though this is pretty rare. Rogue traders are an organization that deserve an entire video by themselves, but in simple terms, rogue traders are merchant houses that are given massive leeway and freedom in their choices and activities in the Imperium. They're often generally merchants and traders, but they're also explorers, artifact hunters, and resource collectors. Along with the formal formations in a fleet, rogue traders may investigate the course of a spaceship in a sector, or investigate an old Xenos construct on a dead world, or begin mining a resource-abundant vein of ore on a newly discovered world. They can and would do basically whatever they could to make money and expand the Imperium. They were often given a writ for specific areas in the galaxy, and have basically free reign to do whatever they wanted within it, but the more adventurous traders would get a warrant of trade for a currently unknown stretch of the galaxy, gambling and exploring for their own riches. So, for just over 200 years, the Great Crusade reconquers the Milky Way galaxy, spreading to the galactic east and north, building an empire of humanity. Along with this, the other Primarchs are discovered one by one. The specifics of their discovery will have to wait until their individual videos, but by pieces, the legions are reunited with their fathers, and the Crusade becomes ever more indomitable. A single Primarch is an absolute trove of knowledge, wisdom, and martial prowess, and 20 of them made every obstacle mere annoyances in the grand scheme. And yes, it was 20 sons. Even the Forgotten Sons were discovered in 821 and 930 M30. While it isn't known why they were removed from Imperial history, it is known that these Forgotten Brothers met their other brothers. Rogodoran, Guilliman, Horus, and Sanguinius, specifically, are written as remembering their lost brothers, knowing of their fates but being barred by the Emperor from ever speaking of them again. It's more than likely that these Forgotten Brothers were reunited with their legions, but in their destruction, their legions suffered as well. It's rumored that the remnants of these legions were folded into the 13th Legion after their destruction, growing the Ultramarines to be one of the largest legions in the galaxy. While their small numbers are a matter of fact, the reason for the swelling are still suspect. Regardless, the spread of the Imperium is inexorable, and all obstacles are pushed aside as they charge forward. However, a few of these obstacles are more difficult than assumed. The Rangdan Crusade was one such war, being one of the most taxing and earliest challenges the Imperium faced. Almost 100 years at the beginning of the Great Crusade, the Imperium reached the Halo Stars. The Halo Stars are a collection of disparate stars on the edge of the Milky Way, and within them, humanity found the empire of the Rangda. The Rangda were a race of worm-like humanoid beings that created a sizable empire within their reach of the galaxy. They were lethally intelligent and ferocious fighters, being able to trick starships into seeing their vessels as friendly. This allowed them to devastate fleets with basically little warning, and be dangerous opponents for even Astartes. This genocide is broken into 3 crusades, with each taking decades of war, millions of Imperial army lives, and tens of thousands of Astartes lives to complete. It almost stopped the Great Crusade itself, threatening to destroy all that the Emperor had built. It's only by his direct supervision and that of multiple Primarchs, 9 Astartes legions, dozens of Titan legios, and tens of millions of Imperial Guard soldiers that the Xenos race was eradicated. It was the closest the Crusade ever came to failure. The First Legion bore the brunt of the warfare, and their numbers took almost 100 years to recover from this. I had said earlier that mortals often believe that Astartes can't die, but that's because crusades like this are suppressed on all levels. No one but those that fight in these wars know of the cost. And in the Rangdan Crusades, it took 80,000 Astartes lives. It took 80 chapters worth of Astartes to crush these Xenos. That's how dangerous this foe was. This is the hardest humanity has been pushed since the Age of Strife, and never again until the Horus Heresy. It shouldn't be said, however, that the Great Crusade was a massive conquest of war and destruction, because many of the branches of humanity that were discovered joined the Imperium quickly and happily. Many rejoiced as the cradle of their species had returned and brought enlightenment with it. Yes, wars were frequent, and likely billions died throughout the Great Crusade, but tens, if not hundreds of billions of lives brought back into the human fold. In 200 years, the galaxy was reforged into a spanning, powerful, and resilient empire of humanity. This can be found in the short story Misbegotten. Horus's fleet arrives in a system with several planets all occupied by humanity. Without a single shot, 3 planets happily rejoin the Imperium, contributing to it and expanding the Imperium's reach. However, a small research station ignores their requests. So, a captain called Hastur Sejanus is sent to bring it to heel with his company. However, after a few weeks the station has not been controlled. Sejanus is incredibly apologetic for this, as initial scans showed only 100 lives on the station, but he has lost several Astartes and seemingly can't make any headway. Horus is shown here as being very close to Sejanus, and chooses to go to him in aid. Sejanus reveals that they are fighting constructs that were once human. The 100 lives are misleading because all of them have been biologically restructured into twisted shapes and abominations. Fused torsos and things that are only a mouth with far too many teeth. They are monstrosities that must be destroyed slowly. As Horus arrives, a massive tunneler attacks, created from dozens of bodies all bound together into one disgusting mass. Horus kills it and captures its creator, as they were built by a man called Basilio Foe. Foe was a gene tyrant of the Old Night, creating armies of these creatures during Terra's Age of Strife, but fled the planet as the Emperor slowly unified it. He knew that one day they would come, but he looks at the Astartes as disgusting. He calls the Astartes Misbegotten, and says that one day they'll bring the end to the galaxy. Wherever non-humans are found, however, this mercy is absent. The largest threat that the Imperium faced after the Rangdan Crusade was the empire of Urlach-Urg, the overlord of an Orc empire centered in the Ullanor system. Greenskins are exponential in their creation. The more there are, the more that take hold as spores and expand. But more than this, the more orcs there are, the more mech boys and weird boys that are created. The Ullanor Empire had billions of orcs, and some of their creations began to imitate the creations of the Krork, their ancestors. Massive scrap moons, gravity-based weaponry, and an endless tide of orc warriors. Wolf of Ash and Fire tells the story of Horus and the Emperor striking out at an orc war boss, standing over 10 meters or over 35 feet tall. It took both of their combined mights to strike it down and destroy the scrap planet it controlled, but this was just a war boss, a follower of Urlach-Urg, the Overlord. In 000 M31, the final campaign took 100,000 Astartes, the entirety of the Custodes Guard, the Emperor, Horus, and millions of Imperial army soldiers to behead the Overlord and shatter the Empire. Then, more forces were needed to systematically eradicate every greenskin in the system, tearing them out root and stem. This was a massive triumph for humanity, and a turning point in the Emperor's eyes. He saw that there was nothing left in the galaxy that could truly threaten the Imperium. There were no Xenos that could stand against the Primarchs, and every planet that fell under Imperial rule, added reinforcements and supplies to the war effort, exponentially expanding the crusade. By this point, records state that there were 4,287 primary expeditionary fleets, and over 60,000 secondary fleets, maintaining compliance throughout the new territories. The Emperor was right. There was no external threat within the galaxy that could have stopped the Imperium, but he had failed to see the threat from within, a threat that started on Ullanor itself. After the eradication of Ullanor was complete, the planet was transformed into a massive parade ground. Tens of millions of soldiers were brought there in celebration. Over a dozen Primarchs, the Emperor himself, dozens of Titan Legios, and millions of Imperial Guard soldiers were mustered in a celebration both of their success and the retirement of the Emperor. He had decided to step down from the Crusade and return to Terra, working on a secret project, so he left Horus as his war master. The Primarchs were understandably shocked. Had they done something to upset him? Is he tired of their presence? They thought he was abandoning them, but more than this, all of them wanted to be war master. They'd once stood as peers, but now Horus was the first amongst equals. Horus, in his own words, states that he was chosen for this because he embodied what the Emperor needed at the time. He was a genius general, but also a master at politics and diplomacy. He could ably lead his brothers in war, but also balance their humors to maintain a level of command over them. It's interesting he said this, as seemingly he believes the Emperor would have picked any son based on the state of the galaxy. If absolutely all threats were destroyed, then he could have passed control to Guilliman, who would efficiently turn the galaxy into an empire. If the greatest threat was that of dissenters or rioters or malcontents, then Johnson could efficiently and silently remove them. Horus was simply the perfect balance of what the Emperor needed. Regardless, Horus now bore the weight of his 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, his entire legion, and the responsibility of the entire Great Crusade upon his shoulders. Despite the transhuman strength and endurance he had, it was a heavy burden. Just after this, the short story, The Death of a Silversmith, tells the story of an unnamed silversmith. He was brought from Terra at Malcador's personal request, hoping for the man to lend his talents to the burgeoning crusade. Reluctantly, the man agrees, but soon finds himself engrossed in his work. He creates pieces of great wealth and great skill, and is known by Horus himself for such works. An Astartes named Hester Sejanus then approaches him, asking him to create 4 silver discs, all showing the 4 phases of the moon. The man is almost offended by the simplicity, but soon finds himself engrossed in the work, pouring all of his skill and talent into the seemingly simple work. Before this is completed, however, another Astartes approaches him, asking for the man to create a simple mold. He is offended at this, seeing it as low work, but he's afraid of the Astartes and feels like he would be hurt if he didn't do so. So he spends a little time on it, forming a mold that is used to create silver tokens, somewhat similarly to Sejanus' request. He completes both and awaits their arrival, but the unnamed Astartes arrives first, asking for the mold. Upon seeing it and approving of its creation, the Astartes crushes the man's throat, leaving him to die slowly. As the life bleeds away from him, Sejanus arrives, genuinely mortified by the man's death, and trying to ask him who did it, but the man can't speak. Sejanus also gets his work, the 4 discs, but is truly saddened by this loss. Now, we arrive at the book Horus Rising, the first novel in the Horus Heresy series, but we won't begin with Horus. Horus Rising is the story of mortals and transhumans, not Horus himself. Garviel Loken, Tariq Targadan, Euphrates Keeler, Mercedes Olaton, Kirill Sindeman, Ezekiel Abaddon. These are names that will be remembered for thousands of years after the heresy is over. Garviel Loken is a captain of the 10th Company of Luna Wolves, being newly raised to the position after Ullanor. He speaks of how the 63rd Fleet discovered the quote-unquote Sol System, a system highly reminiscent of the real Sol System, with a planet that they named Terra, and even an emperor upon it. The fleet is overjoyed to find such a sizable group of humanity, and immediately send a diplomatic group led by Hester Sejanus. Sejanus was a very close captain to Horus, the War Master, being very even-tempered and incredibly capable in matters of diplomacy. However, When he arrives at the false emperor's throne room, he, perhaps too quickly, states that he serves the true emperor. At this insult, Sejanus and his men are cut down, killed immediately. This throws the fleet into a rage, because Sejanus was beloved by all, mortal and transhuman alike. So the quote-unquote imperial fleet is destroyed, and almost the entirety of the Luna Wolves are sent to the planet, fighting through fairly well-armed soldiers below. This is the first look we get into the Luna Wolves during battle, and it's incredibly powerful. Much like the White Scars, they maintain humor and a jovial attitude basically no matter what. A captain by the name of Nero Vipus loses his arm to an auto turret, and when Loken asks if he's okay, he replies that the arm was simply slowing him down. Loken and his company are the first to reach the Imperial throne room, even before Ezekiel Abaddon, who leads the first company. The throne room is a wide, open room high up in a spire, with open walls all around the throne. And as Loken and then Abaddon secure the room from well-trained invisible bodyguards, the throne activates, sending a force of energy that pushes all of the Astartes out of the window. Loken himself barely holds onto the railing instead of being pushed out. Then Horus teleports directly into the room, holds up a pistol, and kills the false emperor. Loken had been a captain of note for a long time, and his speed at taking the throne room made him even more popular. Popular enough to gain entry into the Mournival. The Mournival is a fascinating cabinet that Horus utilizes in a variety of forms. It is comprised of 4 members, each of them varying in temperament and opinions. A firebrand that begs for war, a strategist looking for constant opportunities, a joker seeking levity at every turn, and an even-keeled member that always asks for clarity of thought above all else. In this way, Horus can hear every perspective and understanding of a situation, allowing him to know exactly how his legion feels at any given time, as well as to know every option in a decision. Loken is excited at the opportunity, but is soon worried by it as well. When he arrives on the newly conquered False Terra, now known as 6319, as it's the 19th planet brought to compliance by the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, he seemingly enters a ritual. The Imperium of Man is wholly secular, eschewing any form of religion, ritual, faith, or divine interference violently. There are entire planets that have been granted exterminatus due to an overabundance of faith or worship put upon it. So, as Loken enters a shadowed circle of warriors, reciting memorized lines of performance, he is incredibly uncomfortable. It is quickly dispelled, however, as they chalk up this ritual to simple tradition rather than any sort of faith. The first Mournival was formed on Luna, after the Luna Wolves received their name from the conquest of Luna. So, new members always make oaths to their fellow Mournival members under the light of a moon, as a way to bind them to their legion. Loken accepts this, and is welcomed into the Mournival, next to Tariq Torgadon, the jokester of the Legion and captain of the Second Company, Little Horus Axaman, the most brilliant strategist in the Legion and captain of the Fifth Company, and Ezekiel Abaddon, the Hound of War and captain of the First Legion. These 4 comprise the War Master's closest confidants, and they are put to work almost immediately. It's then revealed that, surprisingly, Horus's equerry, Malagurst, survived the war, when he was presumed dead. Every Primarch has an equerry, being the chief diplomat and spokesperson of the Primarch. Malagurst was once called the Twisted due to his cunning schemes, but during the war against the False Emperor, his Stormbird was shot down. While he survived, his Astartes body was twisted and broken so much that even his Astartes physiology couldn't fix it. So now his body is literally twisted, forcing him to walk using a walking stick. However, the book doesn't just follow Loken, it also peers into the minds of several mortals that follow the Astartes. Just after the Ullanor Crusade, the Emperor decreed that remembrancers should be sent to every expeditionary fleet, to spread ideas and honors from battles won across the newly burgeoning Imperium. These remembrancers take every art form known by man, each using their particular skill to create incredible works in the name of the Crusade. Sculptors, painters, poets, journalists, composers, singers, documentarists. Every art form is used at the highest level to create propaganda that promotes the actions of the Crusade. These people are seen as distractions by most legions at best, and hindrances at worst. Many legions outright refuse to have them, such as the Space Wolves, Death Guard, and Alpha Legion, but there are a few that openly welcomed them, such as Fulgrim. Fulgrim cultivated a massive collection of these remembrancers, and throughout the Crusade, his flagship slowly became a museum of incredible art, beauty, and performance. Horus rested somewhere between these two extremes, recommending his sons to spend time with their iterators and remembrancers to both learn and teach. Mercedes Olatin was one such remembrancer, a documentarist, that Logan allowed to interview him, though they start the relationship poorly, as he angrily dismisses her in their first conversation. But over time, he warms to her, speaking with her on an almost daily basis afterwards. Euphrates Keeler is another remembrancer, a photographer who is rapidly becoming famous across the galaxy. She was one of the people that found Malachurst after the crash, and her photos of him being cared for by simple mortals on the False Emperor's planet created so much empathy and love for the Astartes that it was sent to nearly every fleet in the galaxy. But also, there are iterators, such as Kirill Cinderman. Iterators are incredibly powerful orators that are meant to spread the Imperial truth throughout the galaxy. They are debaters that can win nearly any verbal argument if needed, and are geniuses in the field of psychology and sociology. Horus required his sons to spend time with the iterators, becoming learned not only in warfare, but also in philosophy, history, and any other field of interest. Much like Sanguinius and Guilliman, Horus had to prepare his sons for a possible life after war was over. He desperately hoped for a future of peace, but also dreaded what it meant for his sons, as they were bred for war. But despite the compliance of 6319, the fleet couldn't move on yet. There was a bastion of defense in a mountain range called the Whisperheads, and the Imperial Army just couldn't root it out. The problem is, all of the Astartes forces have been withdrawn from the planet, so redeploying them would be time-consuming and embarrassing to the Imperial Army forces. So, with no diplomatic option, the War Master relies upon his Mournival, specifically the newest member. In a tense command meeting, people argue about how to deal with the last bastion of defense, as the army is incapable of stopping it, but the Astartes could clear it in a matter of hours. The army general is insulted by the implication he can't do it, but is frustrated that he has so far been unable to. So, out of turn, Loken steps forward and asks for the general's forgiveness. The general is confused, so Loken clarifies. The job of the Astartes is to clear all significant pockets of resistance so the Imperial Army can clear it up. That's how the Crusade operates. Again, the spear tip and the shaft. Loken says that clearly the Astartes failed in their job, so he begs for leave to finish what they are unable to do the first time. The general is dumbfounded by this and accepts it. His men are allowed to stand aside while also appearing like a gracious general, allowing for others to fix their quote-unquote mistakes. This is the second purpose of the Mournival. It allows the War Master to do what he normally can't do because of politics. Lambasting a failing general, avoiding political problems with individual actions. This is just one example of how capable he is as a leader and an absolute political animal. So, 10th Company loads up once again and is sent to the Whisperheads. For the first time since their arrival, the Remembrancers are also allowed to come, but are kept well away from the fighting. Loken and his men obliterate the defenses, as literally nothing can stop them. The auto weapons and cannons they use barely scratching their ceramite plate, but a recording keeps playing over and over on the Vox channels. A voice saying, "I am the one that walks behind you. I am the voice in the darkness. I am Samus." They ignore it as propaganda and complete their sweep, killing the hundreds of defenders there. But then Loken finds Xavier Jubal standing in a fane, which is essentially a shrine, while his entire squad is missing. Loken is confused where his men are, but Xavier is incoherent, speaking of spirits and faith. But before he can be restrained, he lashes out, killing several of Loken's squad. This is so much more than a simple killing. A massive part of the Astartes' original psycho-conditioning goes into making it nearly impossible for an Astartes to kill another Astartes. It was literally thought of as an impossibility at the beginning of the Great Crusade, and that it would never happen. So as Xavier drives a blade through one of his brothers, Loken is frozen still. he literally can't draw his bolter, his body revolting against the idea of killing a brother. But as he is beaten close to death by Xavier, he overcomes this, driving a blade through Xavier's chest. It can't be understated how hard this was for Loken to do. He literally says that no matter how much he tries to act, no matter how much terror and dread is in his body, he just couldn't get his hand to grab his bolter. Up until this time, Astartes were bound with this idea that no brother would ever lay a hand upon another brother. So as Loken is confronted with this, it short-circuits his brain. It short-circuits every fighting instinct he has in his body, and he just simply couldn't move. But the Remembrancers land on the planet, almost a half-mile from the planet's defenders, but are quickly forgotten about. So Euphrates Keeler, Kirill Sindeman, and a few others begin wandering towards the battle zone. What they see is sickening. Pulped bodies detonated by bolters, crushed limbs, and gore otherwise. A soldier arrives and requests Sinderman to accompany him. Loken wants a word. Sinderman arrives and Loken is distraught, demanding answers from Sinderman. Loken asks outright if spirits exist, because Xavier seemed to be possessed. Sinderman avidly refutes this, stating that it could have been a virus or some kind of poison that twisted him, and Loken relents. That was until Xavier opens his eyes and says, "I am Samus." He broke free, sprinting away from them and into the wandering Remembrancers, killing a few as his body twists and deforms and transforms into what we know nowadays as a warp spawn, killing multiple people until he's finally put down. Loken is inconsolable about this, seeing it as a personal failure, but then Horus himself arrives and dispels that notion. He states that it was the warp. While he's never seen the warp infect an Astartes, it isn't a spirit or a ghost, just energy that took advantage of weakness. Loken isn't given much time to think about it, however, because Malakhurst the Twisted has received word from another fleet that their assistance is needed, and Horus is happy to oblige. After a relatively short transit of a few weeks, they arrive at 2 expeditionary fleets gripped by indecision. Both of their Astartes corps were comprised of 3 companies of Emperor's Children, the 3rd Legion, and 2 companies of Blood Angels, the 9th Legion, but they are all upon the planet. The Blood Angels arrived first, traveling down to the planet, but after contact was lost, the Emperor's Children stupidly decided to send the entirety of their complement to the surface in support. The planet is covered by a constant storm, which makes flights down incredibly hazardous and communication impossible. So, Horus uses the Mournival once again. Upon his arrival, the Mournival absolutely lays into the general aboard. Abaddon states that under his command, such a general will be stripped of command. Loken says that he will just shoot him. The general is transfixed both by fear at this chastisement by the War Master's Legion, and furious at their lack of politic. Horus then steps in, chastising the Mournival for their anger, and stating that they are simply upset by the possible danger that their brothers are in. Again, Horus is able to verbally punish an incompetent commander without having to do it himself, so he seems like a sympathetic voice of reason. The commander appreciates this and happily hands command to Horus. Questions arise about how they should handle the situation at hand, with Axeman saying they could simply bomb the planet from orbit, neutralizing the threat. Tariq Torgadon is less enthused about this, stating that there could still be Astartes alive on the planet, but Horus can't send his men to the planet after having his men chastise the commander for that very mistake. However, a patch of storm clears, leaving an opening that can be flown through. So, Torgadon volunteers and flies to the surface, looking for others. On the planet, the Emperor's Children are under the command of Eidolon, one of Fulgrim's 2 closest commanders, as well as Lucius, a captain and member of the Palatine Blades, a brotherhood focused on sword combat. Saul Tarvitz is also there, a sergeant that chafes at Eidolon's command. They have been endlessly assaulted by giant spiders called Megarachnids since they have arrived days ago. The Megarachnids are blindingly fast as Astartes, and their mandibles can cut through ceramite, being potent enemies even for Astartes. The planet is seemingly one massive plain of 15-foot tall grass stalks, and they've been walking all this time but have found no landmarks. That is, until they see a tree. Tree isn't the right word, as it's a massive building of stone in the shape of a tree, but around it is a clearing in which they can finally see more than a few meters in front of them. As they get closer, they realize that the tree is covered in skewered bodies. Imperial army, Emperor's children, and blood angels. In anger, Saul Tarvitz recommends blowing up the tree, just so more bodies aren't desecrated, and Eidolon relents. Torgadon flies down into the clearing, finding Emperor's children in desperate fighting and assisting them. He quickly makes the connection that the trees are created by the storm and orders any more of them to be destroyed. But as they fly back to orbit, a fleet enters in the edge of the system. The fleet is panicked for a moment before ident tags are recognized, and Horus is told that his brother Sanguinius has arrived. Sanguinius and Horus love one another. Sanguinius waged war alongside Horus after he was discovered, learning both warfare and his purpose with him. The short story, The Passing of Angels, shows this closeness. Horus and Sanguinius play a game together, similar to chess, as they talk about the future and their roles in the galaxy. Sanguinius laments the destruction of so many cultures, but Horus talks about the necessity of it. That the Imperium can only survive if it's unified in all things. Together, Sanguinius and Horus wage a bloody campaign of war against the Megarachnids, reveling in the fact that for once, a clear and deadly enemy has been found, something so entirely inhuman that there is no sadness or restraint in their actions. It's during this campaign that Loken makes another discovery. While cleaning out Xavier Jubal's personal effects, he found something unusual. A simple silver disc with a wolf's head engraved upon it. He brings the disc to Nerovipus, who has nothing to say about it. But then, the disc goes missing. Loken, already having discovered the disc, is then invited to a secret meeting. Just like during his induction into the Mournival, he finds himself in a shadowy meeting of Astartes, forced to speak recited lines and sayings. His apprehension turns to anger as he realizes that this is a warrior lodge. The warrior lodges were founded on Davin, a planet brought to compliance by the 63rd Fleet, which modeled these groups after the warrior lodges that the local people had formed. Loken had outlawed any of his subordinates to join these lodges, seeing them as yet more secrets that can only bring division in his legion. But, unsurprisingly, he sees Nerovipus there, his most trusted lieutenant, as well as the rest of the Mournival and many captains besides. He tries to walk away, but a captain that Loken dislikes speaks up. The Warrior Lodge is a place where the Astartes can meet without the limitations of rank or responsibility. A newly christened Astartes neophyte can speak as a peer to the captain of the first company, without any fear of reproach or punishment. It's a place where bonds and brotherhoods can be formed outside of their own companies. Rank-and-file soldiers can form bonds with commanders of other companies, strengthening their bonds and making them work alongside each other even more effectively. It's in these lodges that this captain can speak to Loken as a brother, not as a subordinate. He admits he has respect for Loken, and even more so now that his dedication to rules are so resilient. This makes Loken feel wrong-footed. He dislikes the secrecy, but admits that he can see the virtue in such a group. Abaddon then speaks next, gently telling Loken that although the War Master has forbidden such groupings, he knows that they do so. His allowance of these meetings is a clear acceptance of it occurring. So, slowly, Loken begins warming to the idea, and while he doesn't become a full member, he agrees to keep it quiet for the sake of the others. But as the two Primarchs wage bloody war, and the Megarachnids are almost eradicated, another fleet arrives, wondering what they're doing. It's quickly shown that the secondary fleet is human. It's a distant branch of humanity that calls themselves the Interax. Their speech is a combination of speech and music that is incredibly hard to decipher at first. However, Horus is excited at the prospect of a branch of humanity that is so technologically advanced and seemingly open to reuniting. However, as Horus introduces himself as the War Master, they immediately get uncomfortable. Tension is made much worse as it's realized that the Interax work alongside a Xenos species called the Kinnebrock. The Kinnebrock are a ape-like species that have incredibly advanced tech, but have been folded into the Interax after losing to them in a war. Diplomatic talks continue for weeks and are seemingly going nowhere. Despite their claims that they want to enter the Imperium, they have refused any way forward in that regard. Abaddon begs for Horus to release them and wipe out these Xenos-loving degenerates, but Horus says in no uncertain terms that will not happen. Horus, however, is truly beginning to feel the weight of his responsibilities. His delay on this world has led to the buildup of hundreds of requests for aid, assistance, and guidance from other fleets and his other brothers. He is torn between the galaxy and his own desires. Horus wants above all else to bring the Interrex into the Imperial fold peacefully. He once promised his father that he would never fail, that he will be perfect as War Master. But only a perfect War Master could let the Interrex join the Imperium without bloodshed. He sees it as a necessity to find a diplomatic solution, so he dines in one of their cities, talking with politicians and diplomats as Loken patrols the estate. He comes across a captain of the Interrex Guard, striking up a conversation with him. The captain and Loken talk, and Loken begins to admit some of the information that he knows about the warp. This lights a bulb for the captain, as he realizes that they were mistaken this whole time. The Interrex used to work with a group of Eldar, who taught them of chaos, that is, Chaos. They warned them of its destruction and how it would come for them, so since that time they've prepared. They were overjoyed at finding the expeditionary fleet, but the title of War Master made them worry. They believed that they were Chaos finally coming to attack or consume them, but the captain realizes that they were wrong. But just then, he receives a report, and demands that Loken gives up his weapon. As Horus is on the premises, Loken can't do that, and asks him what's wrong. The captain is furious, stating that he was almost tricked just then. Loken had simply played his hand too quickly. Loken is perplexed, but defends himself as the captain attacks. As Loken regroups with his brothers and moves to protect Horus, it's revealed that a weapon was stolen from the Interrex's Hall of Weapons. In this hall, they retire weapons of war to be seen as historical pieces until they're needed once again, and a very dangerous one has been taken. Horus is furious at this misunderstanding, but in a rage demands that the Interrex to be destroyed and brought to compliance. He sees it as a horrible failure, but that doesn't stop his judgment. Savage war is waged against the Interrex, bringing them into compliance and eradicating the Kinnebrak once and for all. In the final words of the novel, Loken discusses the tragedy of this war with his remembrancer, Mercedes Olaton, noting that he wishes it could have been avoided. However, the crusade carries on, and the War Master has been called away to quash a small uprising, occurring in the system of Davin. Now, we find ourselves in False Gods, as the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet arrives at Davin, a system it had already conquered. However, it wasn't Luna Wolves that arrived on Davin. Instead, it was the Sons of Horus. After the Ullanor Crusade, the Emperor suggested that Horus might change his legion's name, but he refused to, maintaining the original. The term, Sons of Horus, have already been used by this chapter, granted to Astartes that have a very close resemblance to Horus due to the gene seed. These are Astartes such as Horus Aximand, which is so close in resemblance to Horus that people literally call him Little Horus. But after the war with the Interrex, and as he sees his second failure in Horus's eyes, he decided to do so, changing their name and their colors from pale white to a sea green, matching his eye color. Davin was a world ravaged by Old Night. Much of their technology and knowledge was lost, rendering them a near-feral world, shrouded by mythology, religion, and worship. Compliance was easy, the weapons and tactics of Davin's warriors posing no real threat to the Astartes. But now, that compliance is threatened. Eugen Temba was a commander that Horus had left in charge of Davin. He was left with significant Imperial army forces to finish the compliance of a world and turn it into a productive world of the Imperium. Temba was a genuine friend to Horus, and Horus had absolute faith in him. So when Erebus gave Horus word that Temba had turned traitor, Horus was confused, hurt, and more than that, angry. The newly christened Sons of Horus make planfall on Davin, convening a war council between the 16th Legion and the 17th Legion, Corpheron's detachment of the Word-Bearers chapter. It is not only Astartes present, however, as a few remembrancers have been allowed to attend as well. Ignace Carcassi is a poet, writing verse, often negatively, about the Crusade. Most remembrancers glorify and almost deify the Astartes and their actions in the Crusade, producing more propaganda than true accounts. But Carcassi refuses to do this. He instead writes the truth, or his version of it at least. He is a gifted orator as well, but this is not the reason he is attending. Loken has called Carcassi to the planet, as Carcassi is also gifted in seeing through liars. Loken wants him to pay attention to someone he doesn't trust, that someone being Erebus. During the fleet's transit, Loken had a conversation with Erebus, a conversation where Loken asks him about the warp and the Interex's idea of chaos. Erebus laughs at this, saying that there is nothing in the warp but energy. There aren't beings or consciousnesses. Loken is silent. He is seen otherwise in the Whisperheads, personally seeing Samus take control of Xavier Jubal, but he doesn't admit this, being silenced by Horus himself. Erebus goes on to say that the Interex can't be trusted, as it was their lie that a Kinnebrock weapon was stolen that caused their war and their own destruction. A cold fear consumes Loken as he realizes that Erebus isn't being entirely truthful, as the Interex had never said what kind of weapon was stolen. So now the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet finds itself on Devon, at Erebus's own request, and Loken is looking for answers. Erebus speaks out of turn, almost insulting the War Master and bringing ire from all that are present. Erebus stokes these flames, stating that Temba has denounced not only Horus, but the Emperor as well, and has declared himself a sovereign entity on Devon's moon. In anger, Horus vows to kill Temba personally, ordering the Astartes to form a strike force to attack with him at the head. As everyone moves to comply, Loken speaks to Carcassi, who says that Erebus is trying to get Horus on that moon. He spoke out of turn to anger Horus and steer that anger towards Temba, but he doesn't know why. Abaddon appears, angry that Immortal speaks about another Astartes in such a way. So, Carcassi blurts out, asking what that silver disc was that they passed between themselves. Abaddon lashes out at this, genuinely trying to kill Carcassi to keep the Warrior Lodge a secret. Loken has to physically restrain Abaddon, telling Carcassi to run. Abaddon is furious and almost fights Loken, but Loken talks him down. Loken is even able to talk past Abaddon's famous anger, getting him to admit something. Erebus didn't join the Warrior Lodge of the Luna Wolves. He founded it. Back aboard the ship, Ignacy Carcassi tries to drink away the previous events, sitting with a female remembrancer that is trying to seduce him. Remembrancers are accepted in the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, but their access is still very limited. Very few of them are actually given access to the Astartes, and these few include Euphrates Keeler, Mercedes Olaton, and Ignacy Carcassi. And all of these three are connected to Loken. So, other remembrancers are often trying to get their way in as well. However, as he tries to get him in bed in exchange for a good word, Euphrates Keeler arrives in the hold. Keeler has been shut in since the events of the Whisperhead, and very few have seen her. The thing that had once been Jubal had almost killed her, charging into her and killing the man next to her. She refused the official line that it was a local animal, and began looking for the real answer instead. So Carcassi is surprised to see her, as she is in very good spirits as well, but she moves on quickly. After she leaves, Carcassi notices a pamphlet that wasn't at his table previously, so he opens it up. Inside he finds printed works of the Lectitio Divinitatis. The Lectitio was a book that was written and printed by the Primarch Lorgar Aurelian, in which it describes the Emperor of Man not as a man, but as a god. This work was written by a Primarch, which means that not only is it incredibly well written and well thought out and well structured, it's also one of the most powerful pieces of writing that could ever be. It was, in Lorgar's own mind, it was his magnum opus. It was his final creation that deified and glorified and respected the Emperor. And while it's been made illegal and is incredibly illegal to have or to read or even just to know things about it, you have to understand that this kind of writing, to those that were looking for something to believe in, something with faith, it had to have been the most potent of sources. But as it's very legal to have and propagating it could lead to capital punishment, it has very slowly but surely seeped throughout the fleet. Small, secret publishing presses are used to make them in secret, and sent to the faithful that read and believe the words. Keeler was once a woman of secularism, and as such, Carcassi is shocked to read the words she left behind. Previously, Keeler had sent Loken a collection of photos after the events of the Whisperheads. He had enjoyed the pics of him in the hangars of the Vengeful Spirit, taking an oath of moment and preparing his men, but months later he'd noticed something that he hadn't before. There were hidden photos in the file as well, photos of the things that had once been Jubal. In a near panic, Loken went to see her. Like with the others, she had been absent for a while and he wanted to check on her. Upon seeing her, she was a mess, and had found comfort in an Imperial Army soldier. She had also found comfort in something else as well, helping her to move past the experience, but she hadn't vocalized it. Now, it's clear that she found comfort and faith in the God Emperor. However, in the modern day, Loken prepares his men to hunt down and kill Temba, unsettled by the thought of their actions. He's worried that this won't be an isolated incident and that eventually their enemies may all have been allies at some point, asking the question, where does the treachery stop when it's so viciously stamped out? They fly off, flying to Devon's moon in what was supposed to be a verdant and green forest. However, when they land, it's far from that. What they find is a moon that is green, but it's green with decay, disease, and plague. The ground is covered in a sucking slime, the trees are riddled with maggots, and an omnipresent fog consumes everything. The Astartes march uneasily, as Loken is shocked and concerned. How did such a moon transform so quickly? The Astartes, the Imperial Army, and the Titans of Legio Mortis march towards a broadcast, constantly and repeatedly refuting Imperial rule and denouncing the War Master. Loken has flashbacks to the Whisperheads and the voice communications of Samus, but dispels this notion. That is, until things begin to rise from the swamp. Hundreds and thousands of corpses begin to rise from the mire, attacking the Astartes. Despite their apparent weakness and diseased bodies, they have incredible strength, and begin to drag down the Astartes into the mire, even killing several. They retaliate, but the Astartes are all surrounded and limited by the fog. They can't coordinate and can't form a defensive line, expending several rounds to kill even a single of these zombies. Eventually, though, they fight their way to the source of the transmission. The battleship that was left under Temba's command crashed into Devon's moon, sticking out of the mire like a mountain of metal. Horus wants to march in, but little Horus advises against this, instead using the Titans to destroy parts of the ship and softening its defenses. Horus relents, marching in as soon as the bombardment is done, leaving the rest of the Legion to defend against the ever-growing hordes of the undead. Once inside, the ship shifts, dropping Horus and separating him from his men. It doesn't stop him, however, as he makes his way to the command deck, finding Temba. Yugen Temba had just killed Virileum Moi, the captain who had entered with Horus, as he's holding a crude-looking blade with a golden hilt. Temba's body is distended and diseased, looking incapable of real movement as his body is bloated beyond belief. However, he whispers Horus's name into the blade and rises. He lashes out at Horus shockingly fast, and Horus has a feeling that he is fighting the blade, not the wielder. While his strength is much too much for Temba, he cuts him down as Temba scores a hit on Horus's shoulder. In his final moments, Temba reveals that he is being possessed, and unwilling in his rebellion. Horus weeps for his lost friend, seemingly not heeding his warning that there are dangerous things within the warp, as there are sentient entities that seek control. Suddenly, as soon as Temba dies, all of the walkers simply die as well, falling over as the fog dissipates. Loken moves and finds Horus, still sitting with the corpse of Temba, and bids him to leave the ship. As they do so, Horus is inconsolable, weakened by the realization of Temba's fate. Then, he collapses. This can't be adequately explained by words. Primarchs are demigods. Their bodies are proof against nearly any poison. Fatal wounds will simply close and heal, and before this point, nothing had ever laid Horus low. For 200 years he fought constant wars, battles, and dangers, but he never so much as backed down before. Now, something is defeating him. The fleet sees him as this immovable object, but this is dispelled in a single instant. In an absolute panic, the Immortal simply stands and watches as chirurgeons and medics flutter around their War Master, desperately trying to find the cause of the problem. What they don't know is that the Kinnebrock blade is an anatheme. Anathemes are weapons created with Nurgle's power, hence the transformation of the moon. They become whatever's needed to kill a specific being. They can rewrite the poison and powers that they contain on an individual basis, becoming whatever it must, and now it was made to kill Horus. In a panic, Horus is flown back to the Vengeful Spirit, but mistakenly, word is sent out that Horus has died. Every person on the Vengeful Spirit clusters into the embarkation deck to see if it's true, but as the flyer lands, the Mortal has no intention to stop and move them aside. Astartes in full battle plate push and bludgeon their way through the masses, charging towards the medical bay in desperation to save their War Master. 21 people die in this madness, crushed under battle plate, but he arrived and the medics try to help him. Primarchs are a masterwork of biology and gene-enhanced physics, and the medics are entirely lost within it. They're tracking white blood counts, Laramine cells, which help to clot wounds, and oxygen levels, but have no idea what their baselines should be. They're frantic and nothing seems to work, so Horus pushes them away. Instead, he calls for a particular remembrancer, Petronella Vivar, to come and speak to him. Vivar was meant to be his personal documentarian, writing about his actions, his decisions, and who he really was, but now he wants her to write down his last will and testament. The calm, collected, and jovial manner he usually holds is gone for one of grim sadness, wondering why his life is ending before he can complete his works. He admits much to her, much more than he had ever to anybody else. Horus says that as soon as he was named War Master, he felt the knives of his brothers at his back. Nearly all of them wanted to be War Master, and only a few of them bowed to him and actually meant it. As stated near the beginning of this video, he said that he was only chosen because he was what the Emperor needed at that time, but none of the others understood this. He explains that him and his brothers aren't inseparable connections of unified force, but instead fractious and often at each other's throats, vying for glory, power, and their father's favor. He says that Sanguinius should have been War Master, and that Sanguinius embodies the traits of their father the most. All of the Primarchs carry a piece of their father, but Sanguinius, for all of his aloofness, was the most like him. He also laments how he and his sons are slowly being replaced by officials, bureaucrats, and tax collectors, and that one day there will be no future for them, no reason for their existence. He claims that the Astartes fight to create their own irrelevance. All the while, the Mortal struggles to understand what's going on, and poorly do so. Abaddon takes his anger out in the sparring cages, destroying several servitors in unbridled anger and fury. Horus Axaman slowly disassembles and reassembles his bolter, obsessed by the rote, simple actions to try to contain his fear. Loken and Torgadon, however, seek a more productive action. At the behest of the lead chirurgeon Vadon, they return to Davin to look for the weapon that caused the wound on Horus that simply won't close. Maybe they can find a cure from it. But as they fly down with Nerovipus and Tybalt Mar, they see a change on the moon. The decay and rot of the moon is now gone and replaced with simple death. The trees are dried and dead, the bogs have sucked up and are all simply dust. As they return to the command deck of the Temba's ship, they find Temba's corpse and a crude-looking blade. It isn't until Loken finds a case for the blade that he makes the connection. The blade was from the Interrex, the anatheme that was the Kinnebrak weapon that was stolen, something that Erebus knew about. Meanwhile, the Warrior Lodge reconvenes, and must make a decision about what is to be done, except only one person needs to decide. It's been decided by all that Horus should be given over to the locals of Davin. There is a Serpent Lodge that is created as a center of healing for all wounds. Someone is placed inside, and either they're miraculously cured, or 9 days later, the temple opens and their body is taken out. Everyone at the behest of Erebus has agreed to do so. All except Horus Axaman. Axaman is furious at this request. They would give their great leader over to mystics and shamans? Horus would never allow this, but as Abaddon explains, at least he would be alive to do so. The medics have no understanding of what to do, and it can't be worse than simply letting him die. So, seeing he's surrounded by a made decision, Axaman relents. As Loken and the others return, they hear that the War Master has been taken from the ship, so they frantically get back on a flyer and follow him down. Torgadon, of his own intelligence, puts together the possible culprit, asking Loken if he blames Erebus. Loken hesitantly agrees, but neither of them have an explanation. Torgadon asks if he thinks Lorgar is making a play for War Master, but Loken doesn't believe that. They know the Primarchs are fractious, but this is a level of magnitude greater than they could believe. Killing another Primarch would be something so taboo as to be unbelievable. But despite their pace, they're too late. Horus is sealed inside the temple, leaving Loken, Torgadon, Vipus, and Mar to stand on one side, and the rest of the Mournival and the Warrior Lodge on the other, splitting the Legion down the middle. Inside, Horus awakes to see a world that doesn't exist. He realizes it's a world built from his memories, a world that slowly slips back and forth between a beautiful paradise and a hellscape of darkness. However, after spending some time here, he finds an Astartes floating in a nearby stream. Upon rescuing him, he finds its Hostor Sejanus. He is overjoyed at finding his friend, but is confused as to how he is here. Sejanus explains that they're in the warp, and as such, speaking to the dead is possible and easy. He's been sent by the consciousnesses within the warp to speak with him and try to get him to understand. The warp simply wants to exist. It wants to be allowed to exist just like the material universe, but the secular crusade of the Emperor is slowly destroying it. Since billions of people are beginning to believe that there are no gods, no afterlife, no heaven, the warp is fading and growing weaker, so they want Horus to stop this. Horus slowly realizes that this isn't Sejanus, but plays along, not quite understanding what he's saying. Quote-unquote Sejanus then takes Horus far into the future. He takes him to a shrine world of modern 40k. Shrine worlds are literally entire worlds dedicated to the worship of the god Emperor. Gigantic churches, altars, and shrines with billions of pilgrims, devotees, and priests all herald the god Emperor. Horus is shocked at this. His father is no god. The Emperor denies that notion himself. Sejanus states that the Emperor wants to dominate the galaxy, and then he'll ascend to godhood, leaving his sons behind as he rises to be the only god left. Horus then also sees 9 statues. 9 statues of the Primarchs, but doesn't see himself. The Emperor's favorite son, his war master, his first found, but he doesn't exist. Despite everything he does, the Emperor rebukes Horus and forgets his memory. This is the trick of chaos. This is amazing writing. The demons of the warp lie, but they always lie with a nugget of truth at the core. This truly is the future of the galaxy, but Horus misunderstands. He sees a future created by his actions, not a future created by his inactions. He's shown a future that will come around due to him turning against the Emperor, but we're told this is what happens if he doesn't. It's perfectly orchestrated, playing at Horus's pride, his need to be accepted and loved by his father, and a craving to be idolized and remembered above all else. It's a perfect scheme for chaos that, for all intents and purposes, works. But before Horus can be convinced further, Magnus arrives. Truly Magnus. He has come because he sensed something that is wrong, and pleads to Horus to see the treachery being laid at his feet. Magnus reveals that Sejanus is actually Erebus, wearing Sejanus' face in the warp. Horus knew it wasn't Sejanus, but is seemingly unsurprised by Erebus, not really caring that it was him all along. As Magnus pleads, Horus gets angry, stating that he will not be told what to do by anybody. He will make his own decisions as he is a war master. In the real world, 9 days have passed. Nearly everybody in the fleet has a master on the Serpent Shrine, waiting to see what will happen. Within this collection, the worship of the God Emperor has exploded. People looking for comfort and hope, turning to the words of Lorgar and the preaching of their god. Euphrates Keeler has become somewhat of a priest. A congregation has grown around her, listening to what she has to say and believing in her words and convictions. However, the iterator Kirill Sindeman has sent for her, so she leaves to return to the vengeful spirit. As this happens, the doors of the temple opens up, the split legion reuniting to see what has become of their leader. Horus steps out, smiling and proud, but Loken detects a change within him. Back on the vengeful spirit, Ignacy Carcassi has been writing poetry about the massacre on the embarkation deck, the 21 mortals crushed under the Astartes in their panic. He has gotten his own printing press, promulgating these poems across the fleet and sparking resentment. Euphrates Keeler enters a room with Kirill Sindeman. Both of them were changed by what happens in the Whisperheads, but in different ways. Instead of Euphrates pulling back and resorting to faith, Kirill has dived into literature, trying to find a reason for what happened in books and writings, and looking for answers there. Together, the two of them look into a book from the recesses of the ship's archives, a book called the Book of Lorgar. Kirill is unable to decipher it, but Keeler realizes that the characters are the same as the tattoos on Erebus' head. So, using a photo of Erebus, Kirill begins to decipher the book. He speaks out loud, but suddenly something leaps up from the pages of the book. A pink horror of Tzeentch appears, gibbering and monstrous, as the Remembrancer and Iterator flee in terror. It attacks them, but Mistress Ingmei Singh, the lead astropath of the Vengeful Spirit, arrives. Using her psychic powers, she can hold it at bay for a few moments, but then it charges them. And as their deaths seem assured, Keeler holds up her necklace and states that the God Emperor protects. The demon shudders at this, so she continues on, speaking from the Lecticio and calling upon the Emperor's power. It's enough to even exorcise the demon. This is shocking, to say the least. Demons don't really manifest in the mortal world at this time, and an exorcism has never been done. We don't really have any answers as to why or how this can happen. Answers will become apparent later on, but for now we don't really have any. What we do know is that this very action turned Keeler into the first Imperial Saint. And from the growing collection and congregations of the fleet, they all begin to see her as such, visiting her in the medical bay as she recovers. Horus's time in the temple changed him, subtly at first, but growing more apparent. In the first day back, he begins to weed out those he can rely upon. First, the Warrior Lodge reconvenes, and they invite Tariq Torgadon to join. Much like the meeting for Horus Aximand, it's shown that the Warrior Lodge has already made a decision, as they believe that something needs to be done about both Ignacy Carcassi and the captain of the Imperial Army in the Expeditionary Fleet, Varvaris. They believe that both of these people don't support the War Master anymore, and want to remove him, but Tariq refuses this. The Lodge says that if they can't remove them, then Varvaris has been asking for someone to pay for all the deaths on the embarkation deck. So, the Warrior Lodge would give them Loken. Tariq is disgusted at this betrayal, and refuses this. He takes out his coin and throws it to the ground, stepping away from the Warrior Lodge and making his choice. Horus, at the next meeting, appears at this Warrior Lodge, and begins using them directly to carry out his actions that he wants. He has his documentarist, Petronella Vivar, killed for his candor during his illness. He had Ignacy Carcassi, the poet, killed and made it look like a suicide. And he begins to find Astartes that he isn't sure will follow his new direction. Horus blatantly starts a war with the Eurasian Technocracy, a human group with multiple functioning STC templates. STCs are a massive trove of information, and intact, surviving ones are worth entire solar systems. So, Horus trades these STC templates with the Mechanicus, garnering loyalty with many of the leaders of the Mechanicus. During this conflict, Horus places Astartes that may oppose him on the front line. Loken and Torgadon themselves lead the final assault, an assault that almost saw both of their deaths. It did, however, lead to the death of the Imperial Army captain, Varvaris. As stated, Varvaris was asking for accountability from the Astartes that killed the 21 people, but now he was silenced. Horus also summons and speaks to both Angron and Fulgrim, likely speaking to both to swing them to his side. Angron despises the Emperor, so this would be easy, and Fulgrim loves his brother. This love, paired with a certain blade we'll talk about next episode, has made him fully loyal to Horus. He has begun his plan to overthrow the Emperor, and is cleaning house and amassing allies to do so. On the final page of the book, he states that he has sent orders to other legions, either placing them somewhere to be betrayed and attacked, or out of the way so they can't stop him. Horus is War Master, so his orders are obeyed with no question. But next episode, we'll talk about what these orders are, and what they'll mean for our galaxy as a whole. I'll also cover other legions that have been falling to chaos already individually, such as the Emperor's Children and the Alpha Legion, and why each of them fell for their own reasons. Thank you for listening. This is a very long episode. It took a lot longer to create than I was hoping for, but I hope you enjoy it as I start to really talk about the entirety of the Horus Heresy. Again, trying to tie in all of these short stories and other outside works as much as possible to create a holistic understanding of what happened during this time period. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed. Again, thank you for letting me ramble on for so long. I'm really excited to actually get into this and be able to create such an expansive series, and I hope you all like it as well. Thank you. Have a fantastic day.